IP obsession is killing art. It just is. And as someone who is self-identified as a nerd since I was a kid, I have loved comic books and Star Wars and a million other franchise properties, like you name it. I am absolutely sick of this. I'm fed up. I don't want more. Variety tweeted yesterday in a tweet that I think is supposed to be shady to Deadpool and Wolverine that due to a sheer lack of compelling options, Deadpool and Wolverine is expected to top the box office in its 6th weekend of release. Now, like I said, I think they're trying to be shady to Deadpool and Wolverine, but I think this is inadvertently shady to all of the incredible original films that are in theaters right now that audiences just aren't seeing. And listen, I know this conversation is exhausting. I know that we've been having this conversation in one form or other over and over and over again for the past decade, but I think that's because it's important. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, that's not me. I go and see movies all the time. I support original art. I'm an AMC A-lister. And you know what? I love that for you. I love you. You keep doing that. But most people are not. Because we're in a vicious cycle right now, and it is not just the studios that are to blame for this. Yes, the studios are to blame in a big way, based on the projects they greenlit, based on the projects that they throw advertising dollars behind. That absolutely matters, but it feels like we are fundamentally losing this curiosity and motivation from the audience to seek out things on their own without expressly being handed something on an advertising platter. And listen, I don't at all blame audiences for being excited about properties and characters that they already love. God knows I've done that a million times. And I'm also not limiting this to just like Marvel and Star Wars. I also think that the popularity of biopics is like hugely influenced by the fact that studios know that there is a pre-existing fan base for these public figures that they've all of a sudden decided to make movies about. But like as someone who loves Star Wars, I haven't watched like the last 3 Star Wars projects because it just feels so cynical to me. It has literally stripped the joy out of something that I love, that I grew up with. I don't want my kid to grow up watching whatever Disney Plus Star Wars show. I want to wait until he's old enough and introduce him to the original movies that are good. And that isn't to say that any of the projects aren't good or the creatives that they have working on them aren't talented. I love Andor. I'm still a fan of Leslie Headland. But like, it just feels like such a blatant attempt to stretch this property, to spread it like butter as thin as possible into every nook and cranny of this universe, to squeeze every dollar out of it. And I hate that. I hate it. And I don't mean to sound so cynical. I like a lot of these things. I've been a defender of the MCU in general for a long time. I know that there are a lot of contributing factors. I do think that the streaming bubble is in the midst of bursting and the film industry is rapidly changing. And like the film industry hasn't really recovered from the strikes last year. Like a lot of people, production is way, way down. And I don't think that's just a result of the strikes. I think it's a result of the fact that it was never sustainable. What had happened, what was artificially inflated by streaming was never sustainable. And so I think there's going to be a lot of casualties from that. But I feel like every time there is a success story in the industry these days, it's something that I can just see is the wrong lessons are gonna be learned from it. And I feel like the success of like Deadpool and Wolverine is another prime example of that. Again, I don't blame audiences for liking it. A lot of recent movies that have come out that could be labeled as IP fodder or legacy franchise installment are movies that I really enjoy. But I feel like that's because we've moved backwards. Like David Fincher's first film was Alien 3. He wasn't able to make his passion project. He had to do like the franchise sequel. And now it's like you have to prove yourself and get an Oscar nomination and then you get handed the reins to a franchise, which like, that just doesn't make sense to me. Like we have some of our best young creative talent, instead of doing the projects that they would be making a name for themselves with, that they could be making their own legacy with, doing these legacy sequels. And then in the meantime, we have Dee Dee and Sing Sing and Strange Darling originals in theaters that just aren't getting the attention they deserve. And it sucks. I don't know what's going to happen. I know there's always going to be artists. I know there are always going to be people who appreciate real artistry, but film as an art form is relatively new in the grand scheme of things. It's only about 100 years old. And ever since it first began, it's been getting closer and closer to just being fully integrated with like capitalist entertainment as opposed to like art. And the past few years have just felt really bleak. And even when some of my favorite movies are essentially legacy sequels and IP, the lines are becoming blurred in a way that it freaks me out. And it would be one thing if we were still getting tons of successful original content alongside of like amazing legacy sequels like Blade Runner 2049 is an example of genuinely one of my favorite movies. But it feels like we're getting less and less all the time. I don't know. There are a lot of factors. I just saw a great video today about the music industry, about how like algorithms have curated our taste to be increasingly more hegemonic, and like we all have to agree of what is good and what is bad. And there's been far less like eclectic outliers in terms of like the kind of art that we consume, because we're all just driven to the same thing by the forces that are just in our lives constantly, technology and capitalism. And I don't know what the solution is, but I don't love it. I don't love the patterns that I'm seeing. And I don't know. Go see some original movies, please.